Hi, friends. We're called to be encouragers. That's kind of a lost art in life in general, but certainly within the Christian walk, to be people of encouragement. We tend to just harp on the negative, and that's not very attractive and it's not very helpful. Yeah, we have to see the negative, but then also see the negative as opportunity. So, along those lines, you know, we've always heard this, that God can take something bad, even something evil. Now, what is evil? Evil is the absence of the good, or absence of God. God can take something that is tragic, that is a loss, that is a hurt, that is a wound, that just doesn't seem to be any good for us, and He can redeem it. And in redeeming that event, that moment, that experience, He can make good come out of it. And that, the thought of that, let alone the reality of that, just blows our mind. So, for instance, God can take our sins, redeem them, and make good come out of them. God can take something that has happened to us really hard in our family, and yes, we can concentrate on that for the rest of our lives and let it ruin us, or we can give it to the Lord, allow Him to redeem it, and great good, a greater good, can come out of it. Ultimately, the greater good leading us to heaven, but even great good in this life can come out of it. And not just for us, but for so many other people that we share, not just the pain of the story of our life from that one moment, that experience in our life, but the story of our redemption, of our freedom, of our hope again, of a new life again. All right. This is certainly the case with the early Christians. And I'm thinking specifically from the scriptures in Acts 11, when the first wave against the Christians were not the Romans, actually. It was the Jews themselves. And we see that soon after Stephen, who we call Stephen the Martyr, St. Stephen the Martyr, he was a Jewish man who had converted to Christianity. He was a deacon. He had his hands laid upon him. He was ordained a deacon, and he was persecuted and put to death at the hands of Saul himself, who later becomes St. Paul. And we'll get to that in a second. So soon after there's this big wave of persecutions against the Christians themselves. Yes, it started with Christ, but now it's really picking up momentum. And what ends up happening is many of the Jewish Christians start to mass exodus Jerusalem. And they go to other cities like Antioch and many other places, kind of going into hiding, getting out of Dodge, laying low, trying in fear to protect themselves and their families. And in all appearances, this looks like a disaster. That the earliest Christians, who God says to, go out and baptize and make disciples of all nations. Well, it looks like this is going to get nipped in the bud. And they're not going to go to all nations. They're going to scatter, and that's going to be about it. They're going to dissipate. So it looks like a disaster, the persecutions and then the scattering that follows that. But God can make great good come out of great tragedy, great loss, great evil even. And that's where we enter in Barnabas. His name means son of encouragement. Son of encouragement. And some of these Christians that went up to places like Antioch, they start to mix and mingle with the Jews there, but they also start to mix and mingle with the Gentiles, the non-believers, the people from other cultures, from other religions, or no religion at all. And some of these are from, different parts of the world, like Cyprus, Cypriots they are called. Well, so was Barnabas. He was a Cypriot. And so these fleeing Christians, fleeing just a terrible event, end up in other cities, and they encounter Gentiles there. And guess what happens? They start to tell them about Jesus Christ. And they listen because they're living in darkness. They're living in the oppression of the Roman Empire. They're living in poverty. They're living in all kinds of situations. They're living in the reality that there's got to be truth out there, and yet they cannot get access to it, and they want more than what life is offering them. Enter these fleeing Christians who are telling them about this more, telling them about Jesus. They listen more and more, and guess what happens? They start to convert to Christ and to Christianity. So word of this gets down to the church in Jerusalem, and they send up Barnabas to find out what's going on. Barnabas comes up, and he sees these new waves of conversion, not among the Jewish population alone, but among the Gentiles. Big news, right? And he listens to these Gentile Christians and their stories and their lives, and he sees the good that's happening here, and he acknowledges it. And what does he do? He encourages it. Barnabas, son of encouragement. He encourages the Christians that are there to continue the work. He encourages those who are being converted to continue on the road of conversion and to join and with these first evangelists, and to bring more and more people to Christ, and then to change their lives. And encouraged by this, they gain hope, they gain faith, they gain trust, they gain happiness and joy. Fears vanquished, and they start to change their society and their neighborhoods and their fellow citizens in Antioch. Well, this becomes a big deal. And what does Barnabas do? Barnabas, he goes up to Tarsus to get Saul, who he has heard, gone through a conversion. And so Saul is up in Tarsus, and he says to this man who once persecuted the church, who has now become this great evangelist, listen, I need you down to Antioch. You and I are got to do this together. And so down they go, and in Antioch they remain for over a year, teaching the Gentiles, leading the Gentiles in worship and the celebration of the Mass, and receiving the Eucharist and the sacraments, and growing in faith and in virtue and in holiness of life. Barnabas, the son of encouragement, encourages even this great apostle like Paul to do the work of God, let alone other people, let alone Gentiles and non-believers. And Antioch becomes such a Christian city that we know from history and even from the Acts of the Apostles that it is the first city in which followers of Christ are named Christian. You know what Christian means from the Latin? It means little Christ. Little Christ. That's what we're supposed to be. Little Christ. And what does Christ do? He fulfills the will of the Father, and he comes and he lives his life and preaches and teaches and witnesses in such a way that he brings people not just to himself, but to the Father. And that's what we're supposed to be. That's what we say we are. We're Christians. The reason why I bring all this up is that we live in an age now in which we are going through these new waves of persecution against us as Christians. And often from people of other faiths, or even more often from people of no faith. We're being persecuted by the government, just like in Roman times. And we're being persecuted by our culture, by an unbelieving culture, for instance, by a hedonistic culture, so on. Okay, yeah. Mm-hmm. And what are we doing? We're doing the same thing that the early Christians did. We're scattering. We're scattering into our churches and making religion, our faith in Jesus, a private thing. It's between me and God and maybe a few hundred people in our churches. Or we're taking it a step further. We ourselves are no longer going to church, and we're scattering and hiding in our homes, right? So religion then is such a private thing that it's just me and Jesus, and of course, when it gets to that point, it just dissipates. Because we're really not growing in our spiritual life at this point. It's not a robust spiritual life, right? We're not in the Word. We're not in community with others. We're not in the sacraments. We're not, all that stuff. Okay. But then it doesn't stop there. We scatter into our culture. We become anonymous among an unbelieving society, and we are friends with people. We are in relationships with people. We're in our workplace. We're in our schools, and they can't tell us apart from the rest of society because we're not speaking about Jesus, and we're not acting like Jesus, and we're participating in sin and hedonism, selfishness, and we're being fearful like everybody else, and so on and so forth. We are scattering. But remember, we don't concentrate on the negative. That's certainly not attractive to anyone. And it doesn't win conversions. Courage, joy, hope, all that stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So just like in the early church, today we have this great opportunity. In our persecuted, scattered state, we have the opportunity to be Barnabases, sons and daughters of encouragement. And that is to go out into an unbelieving world and live our Christian faith and share our Christian faith by our words, by our deeds, by our actions, by our character, by our integrity, by our virtue, by our strength, by our hope, by so much. In relationships that are near and dear to us, and to people who are acquaintances, and to anybody else that God then will put in our lives because we are sons of encouragement rather than sons and daughters of fear and of negativity and of no hope. And when that happens, brothers and sisters in Christ, the same thing happens to the early church. It blows up. Right? And outward. Like a nuclear bomb, right? But that doesn't destroy life, but brings life. Like concentric circles, we just, drop in the water of the culture, and our presence has a reverberating concentric effect upon the lives of so many other people. And then being Barnabases, for our society, for our families, for our marriages, for our churches, for our schools, we're able to do incredible things in our cities. And then what happens? People start knowing the places where we dwell as Christian places. There's a Christian family. There's a Christian household. There's a Christian marriage. There's a Christian school. There is an on-fire church, Christian church. There's a Christian workplace. There's a Christian neighborhood. There's a Christian group of friends. There's Christians helping the poor. There's Christians fighting against injustices, and so on. And then we become known as a Christian city again, the city that we dwell in. And on it goes, just like it did in the early church, that grew from an apostolic age into an age of Christendom, where everything, every part of society, everything was affected by the presence of God, simply because we became Barnabases, sons of encouragement, daughters of encouragement. Oh, there's hope. There's a way, absolutely. And we just have to let Jesus be that way, that truth in the life. Until next time, friends.